This is the Weather Lounge here at WeatherWorks.
Hi there, everyone, and thanks for dropping by the Weather Lounge, your go-to podcast about the weather. And joining me, as always, from our headquarters here at WeatherWorks is my very knowledgeable co-host, meteorologist Mike Mahalik.
I finally like that introduction.
I'm keeping them short and sweet now. You know, we've been on the air for a while now. Everyone knows who we are.
I like the knowledgeable part. Harkening back to my Penn State career, or not career, but days.
Yeah, I'll come up with some other ones as we get, out of winter here.
Right. Hey, but Brad, today we're going to be kind of like mechanics.
On a car?
Yeah, why not?
All right.
So we're going to go under the hood of a winter storm.
I like that.
Yeah, so, in other words, we're going to go through the nuts and bolts of how the atmosphere can produce 1, 2, maybe even 3 feet of snow.
Hey, it happened last February in some parts of the Northeast.
Yeah.
But, I guess we'll discuss that, a good old-fashioned snowstorm is like baking a cake. Or it's like a recipe, if you will.
I thought we were mechanics. Now we're cooks and chefs. We are cooks.
We're going to go under the hood and we're going to cook. How about that? Because really, to get your typical snowstorm, you need all the ingredients to come together for a tasty treat. How about that?
Okay.
A lot of folks like snow out there.
I do too. The snow's the icing on the cake, right?
I like that.
Jeez, these dad jokes are really getting bad.
I know.
Well, anyway. So where do we start, Brad? I think we talk about the setup for a typical snowstorm. What are the ingredients that you're talking about that you need to bake this snowstorm cake?
Well, I guess, it's very, everyone knows. I mean, you need cold air for one. It's just like a thunderstorm in the summertime. This is a winter storm in the wintertime. And, you need the cold air. Obviously, you need moisture. You need the right wind direction. A lot of folks, think that, you have cold air and, the moisture, you get that snow. Yeah, maybe you get snow for an hour or two, but if that wind is not correct, at least here in the Northeast, if it's onshore coming off the Atlantic, that snow is not going to last very long.
Like you just said it, the Atlantic, we got a giant ocean to our east. So that can really throw monkey wrenches into storms.
It helps and it hurts because, you need the moisture, and a lot of times that's where
depends how you feel, though. Some people aren't all snow lovers out there, Brad. I know you may be, but some may just want the rain and say, the heck with the snow.
By March, I'm done with snow, basically. I'm ready for it to end. All right, so we got the cold air, the moisture, the correct wind direction, and also, if you want to get a real big storm, what we also need is what's called a blocking high, and we've talked about this before in previous podcasts. Really, you need a negative North Atlantic oscillation. You need a high like over Greenland, and it's kind of like a stop sign in the atmosphere, or really a slow-moving vehicle in the atmosphere, because it kind of backs up everything to the west of it. So if you want a good, the most historic snowstorms here in the Northeast, the big nor'easters, the 2-3 footers, usually happen when you have something that's blocking the storm from escaping quickly. So that's why you get maybe 24 to 36, even 48 hours worth of snow, and it piles up. And that's exactly actually what happened last February here in the Northeast, when we had like a 3-day snowstorm.
Oh my goodness. That storm was unbelievable. I don't think I've seen it snow.
I've never.
For that long, at least where I live in eastern Pennsylvania. But that's exactly what happened there. We had a blocking high over Greenland. It bottles up that jet stream. It bottles up those storms. So basically, once it developed, it really didn't have a place to go.
Right.
It was stuck there until that high would move a little bit and allow that storm to leave. So that's why, everybody who's a weather weenie out there and loves snow is looking for that negative NAO to show up, because they know that this could be good.
Negative NAO in the middle of winter is almost a guarantee for snow. You get that sometimes in November. You're kind of marginal still with temperature. March also, you sometimes get a negative NAO also, but you're starting to lose that, daytime snowfall chance and things like that. But yeah, you get that January, February. Negative NAO, look out.
Right. And what's also helpful is a ridge out in the western part of the United States, too. We like to see that happen. We like to call it a positive PNA that we like to see, where it develops a ridge in the jet stream, or a jet stream that's heading further north into Canada and then diving down in through the plain states. So basically, if you have a ridge in the west and you have a blocking high over Greenland in the east, you're just going to have a big giant trough that's going to be rather sharp over the eastern.
And it keeps the cold air flowing into the Northeast from the Canada, and really what they call is what's it called, transcontinental. I'm trying to think of the word now. When the airflow actually comes all the way from Siberia, it basically goes over the North Pole, through Canada, and really straight into the Northeast.
It just drops right in, and that's something that western ridge can help out with, and
the bridging high between the two. Yeah,
there's even something called an EPO, or an East Pacific Oscillation, that does also put a ridge into parts of Western Canada and really shoves the cold air down. Sometimes the EPO and the NAO, I know we're talking like crazy alphabet acronyms here, but
it's all teleconnections.
Yeah, so basically that high in Alaska and the high over Greenland sometimes can be strong enough where they kind of merge and they kind of converge on the pole, and then there's no place for the cold to go other than down into the into the United States there, or conversely it can go into Europe and those areas.
Right.
So yeah, that's the ingredients of these big storms, that's for sure.
And really it produces a couple of different types of snowstorms. At least here in the Northeast, we have what we call names for each type of storm, where they develop. And the most typical, Mike, is a Miller A versus a Miller B.
Yeah, that's the most typical thing you may hear in the weather enthusiast community about, these two different types of snowstorms. And a lot of times they get a lot of fanfare because they have the potential to produce a lot of snow for the Northeast. So let's start quickly with a Miller A, since, A comes before B. Makes sense to start with a Miller A. So these are the type of snowstorms that develop down almost in the Gulf of Mexico.
Right.
And they ride along the Gulf of Mexico, gather a ton of moisture, and then ride up the eastern seaboard.
Strengthening as they do so.
Yes, strengthening and sucking in a lot of cold air on the western portion of that storm too. So they have a ton of moisture, which is always great. It's just a matter of the exact track of these systems on where you're going to get your heaviest snow, and that heaviest snow does fall on the western side of that track as the storm pushes up to the north.
Right, the storm kind of rides right there along the Appalachians.
Yeah,
and it's usually not going to go to the west of into Ohio Valley and things like that. It's more of a coastal system, and this is one of those storms that can almost guarantee snow from Boston down through Washington D.C., sometimes even further south, sometimes all the way down to Atlanta. I mean, Superstorm 93 was probably the biggest and well-known Miller A storm.
It's the best example of a Miller A because basically your polar jet merged with the subtropical jet. Everything cut off.
Everything came together.
The polar vortex dropped in behind the storm in March. It was a very volatile system. I know there was a derecho that went across Florida.
Into Florida, right.
As that low pressure was developing. And it was even strong down in Florida, from what I remember. And then it lowered to, I think, about 960 millibars as ridiculous. It went over Philadelphia, which I think was the lowest pressure up until Sandy made its way through that area.
Now, what if we had a Superstorm 93 like today, like this winter? I mean, WeatherWorks, that's something that we would know about several days in advance, and we'd be sending stuff. I mean, could you imagine a Superstorm 93 like to go through here? I mean, last year, of course, we had a tough storm in the February, but
yeah.
I think that the writing was on the wall with this one 4 or 5 days before it happened.
It was well in advance.
Yeah.
It was very well forecasted by a lot of the computer simulations that we have and the models. So, man, if we knew this storm was coming, we'd probably know a week in advance, honestly.
We'd be sending out statements and alerts like a couple days ahead.
Yeah, we'd probably do like a special thing that's like kind of a paragraph with a map and just saying like, hey, this looks like it could be a big deal. And then, we'll get, more refined as we get closer and closer to the storm. But yeah, that's a classic. And, I
kind of do and don't want to see another storm like that, because I was really just getting into college. I think I was a freshman then.
Right,
but,
right.
I mean, and the computer models were so much different back then. I would love to see that type of storm. I think I'm saying that
You
now.
think?
Yeah. But
maybe.
I would kind of like to see that again, just to see how the dynamics and everything come together and the models, how they would handle something like that. Just, I mean, it's if you're a up and coming meteorologist and you love snow, that's the storm you got to look at and just study, because it had everything.
Right.
It had tornadoes, it had blizzards. I mean,
yeah. I know I got upset. It started sleeting at my house
because it was so strong. It pulled up. It was just.
Yeah,
the dynamics were incredible.
I remember it was cold too when it started sleeting, which and at the time, 93. I don't know how old, 12 or something like that, it might have been. So at that time, I didn't know why something like that would even happen, but, once you get into those warm conveyor belts and cold conveyor belts and you get those warm noses, changing, your snow over to a mix, then you start learning that once you get into it.
Yeah, I think I remember it like sleeting at 22 degrees, and it's just unheard of. I mean, how can it sleet when it's that cold? I mean, it's
just an amazing storm, though. And, I think that kind of segues into the Miller B storm. Now, this is a situation where you likely have a storm system coming across, I'd say, the Ohio River Valley, or it comes through the Great Plains first and then hits the Ohio River Valley.
And not all that strong usually.
Yeah, I mean, it could even be a Clipper system like we'll talk about next. But yeah, and then once it gets to the coast, everything kind of comes together. The coastal low forms. There's
kind of jumps.
Yeah, explosive development. Of the low.
Bombogenesis.
Yes, that's the buzzword usually in the media, is the bombogenesis, which is, I believe is 24 millibars in 24 hours of a drop is the minimum requirement for that. And a lot of times that does happen. There's definitely some storms that have undergone that type of transformation. And you have down here Snowmageddon in February 2020, which I'm sure lots of people in the Mid-Atlantic remember, because I think Maryland probably got the most snow they've seen in a long time during that winter.
They got 2 seasons worth of snow from that.
Yeah, it was something
storm.
like I think it had like something like 60 to 80 inches of snow. And I remember watching that winter go down here at WeatherWorks, and I was saying, well, that might be all the snow they get for the next 10 years.
Possibly.
Because, it's tough to snow down there in the Mid-Atlantic.
Yeah.
But they certainly got it back in Snowmageddon. Yeah, that was back in like 2010, I want to say.
Yeah, it's February 2010. I mean, that's a great example of a Miller B system.
Right, and that certainly was a system in the Mid-Atlantic that was unbelievable for them. That was the year, I think, 09-10, where the Mid-Atlantic just got crushed by storm after storm.
Yep.
They had 2 big-time storms back-to-back. I think there was, I don't know which one was exactly Snowmageddon, but I think there was one on like the 5th and 6th, and then there was one on the 9th and 10th or something. It was only a few days later where they got hit again.
Yeah, I was down south at that time, but I remember watching it unfold.
But one that really stands out in my memory that was a Miller B was they called it Nemo. In 2013, there was a blizzard in New England.
Oh, yes.
In 2013, that dropped 3 feet of snow in parts of Connecticut. There were even some amounts higher than that, but there wasn't a whole lot of support for those. And I know that because I was doing the certified snowfall totals for the state of Connecticut during that time.
I think I might have asked you that when we weren't doing a podcast. Like, what was the most amount of snow we ever given to a CST location? I think I remember you telling me it was 2016 with the...
Nah, I'm not sure exactly when it was.
Yeah.
But I know I gave out some 36-inch amounts during that storm. And that actually produced a band of snow, believe it or not, that dropped 6 inches an hour.
Wow.
Over some parts of northeast Connecticut, which was, I mean, that's like lake effect snow rate coming out of a storm system.
Now, you're down in the Lehigh Valley. Wasn't there a storm a couple of years ago, I remember, I mean, it was just. I remember we were all in our WeatherWorks group meet chatting back and forth, and I thought you said there were like 4 to 5 inches you got in 1 hour.
Yeah, that was 2016. January 2016. I remember it well because that's when my son was born. Right. And I was at home at the time. And yes, I had 2 hours of 4 inch an hour rate. And, obviously we ended up with somewhere near 30 inches during that system. So that was I don't know if I remember seeing it snow that hard. That was probably the hardest I've seen it snow, because even in the storm last year in the Northeast in February,
there were some breaks in the snow. It was a long
it was
event.
a long drawn out storm.
Right.
Yes, there were some really big time rates in there, maybe 2 or 3 inches an hour, but I don't know if we quite hit that type of intensity. And surprisingly enough, there wasn't any snow in that band that I remember in 2016 or the 2021 here in February storm.
We've talked about
it's been elusive to me, Brad. I cannot.
What happens with old age, Mike?
I know. I cannot find thunder snow, at least where my location is. And I've had some pretty crazy deformed bands of heavy snow over my house. And
you just get that storm to pivot just right over your area. And
I don't get it.
Yeah.
Jim Cantori gets to see it every year.
Wherever he goes, he gets thunder snow.
And I can't seem to find one. I mean, the closest thing, like I've said before in a podcast, maybe in the precip type podcast, was when I had thunder sleet. And that was here at WeatherWorks. We were forecasting that, and a very strong cold front was coming through. It was almost like thunderstorms were developing along the front.
Yes, I kind of remember that. There was a couple of warnings that were...
Yeah, there was thunderstorms. So the stuff that was falling from the sky, we had a hard time actually identifying whether it was hail or whether it was sleet. But then, because there was big chunks mixed in with the sleet, it was so strange.
It was slail.
Slail?
Yeah.
Or what would the other way of that be?
I don't even know. What would be heat?
Hailed? I don't know. I like the schlail. No, slail.
Anyway, you know what? Our own meteorologist Mike Priante, he did a great blog on this. Miller A versus Miller B. You can go check it out at our website, weatherworksinc.com. Just look under our blog section, or just go in the news and you type in search and type in Miller A, Miller B, and you'll find it. So he really wrote this well, and he's of course a fine part of our podcast here.
Of course,
sitting right next to us.
Yeah, he's over in the production area. Yeah. But no, those are the big storms, Brad, that cause these blizzards that drop feet of snow.
The memorable ones.
In the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. So those are the real big ones. But there's something called Alberta Clipper. That's a system that affects us
a couple times a year.
And these originate, like its name says, in the province of Alberta in Canada.
Moose Jaw? That's Saskatchewan.
So, anyway, Alberta Clippers are basically fast-moving storms that come out of Canada. They usually are very moisture-starved. So that means that you're getting some high-ratio snow, too, because it's coming from a dry area that doesn't have a lot of moisture, and a cold area.
Arctic area, usually, yeah.
Yeah, so these systems are certainly colder, produce fluffy snow. Usually, you don't get too much more than... a coating to an inch. I'd say maximum on just a clipper alone, maybe around 3 inches.
Right, usually a 1 to 3 inch
something like that.
And your moisture amounts, like you said, you're lacking in that. You may only pick up, at the most a tenth of an inch of liquid precipitation, but with the ratios, Mike, we're talking about 20 to 30 to 1, that can easily, turn into 2 or 3 inches just on that little bit of QPF.
And obviously, these are the type of snows where, some of our clients may even do this, where they go out and get a backpack leaf blower and they just blow off the sidewalk because it's so light and
easy
fluffy.
To remove. Yeah.
I mean, if it's cold enough, it hardly even wets the sidewalk itself because it's so dry, such a dry snow. But yeah, I mean, Alberta Clipper, we talk about some other versions of Alberta Clipper. I think there's a Saskatchewan Screamer
yeah.
And my favorite, Manitoba Mauler.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that was coined by one of our former employees here or by somebody else. I'm not quite sure. But that was one of his favorites to say, the Manitoba Mauler.
I think that was a wrestler in a Bugs Bunny cartoon one.
Oh, no, it was Crusher.
Well, I remember Crusher. I thought there was another
Crusher was the boxing match with Bugs Bunny, and
people listening to Bugs Bunny. What's Bugs Bunny?
Why they probably don't? There's a lot out there who know.
There is
Bugs Bunny, I'm sure. But yeah, he fought the Crusher, and we always kind of make fun of that in the winter season when a big snowstorm is coming, and we kind of talk like.
In the office, Crusher.
Yeah. You say the Crusher.
Well, that was how the announcer.
That's how they
introduced Crusher.
Yeah, the boxing announcer.
And in this corner,
and the champion of the world, the Crusher. Yeah, but anyway, that's my old timey voice, so we'll go away from that.
Now these clippers though, Mike, too. I mean, they kind of pull what we would say what a Miller B does. Also, once in a while, and this really needs blocking though up ahead of it. Usually these clippers will slide right off the coast. It'll clear out quicker. It'll be sunny usually by that afternoon. It'll be cold because the Arctic air is kind of coming in. But you get that quick 1, 2, maybe 3 inches of snow, and it's gone. The storm's off the coast, and you're clearing out. But once in a great while, you'll have what we were talking about earlier, get some of that blocking ahead. And the Clipper will try to climb the coast just a little bit, and not usually here in the Northeast itself. It's more towards New England. But some of these Clippers can, what we call, bomb out every once in a while because you get a chance to slow down and, gain some moisture and turn into a nor'easter kind of.
Right.
But again, it's only going to impact maybe from Connecticut, Rhode Island, and points north because it doesn't have enough time to really affect anyone else. So once in a while, though, you'll get these New England snows that'll become or come from an Alberta Clipper, and they'll produce a quick foot of snow somewhere. Again from Maine down towards like maybe Boston.
Yeah, and that's kind of, if I'm remembering right, the year where New England had 100+ inch snowfall for the year. That year had a bunch of the Miller B Clipper type systems that hit the coast. They hit that and then there's just baroclinic zone, we like to call it, where there's a big gradient of temperatures there at the coast, and they just blow up. And it seemed like every other snowstorm that I was forecasting started out at several days out at, okay, we're just going to start with 8 to 12 inches, and then we'll go from there. Because there was always ratios in there that didn't quite know, and then they ended up being higher that you had to kind of decipher as the storm got closer.
Yeah, that was the year there was quite a gradient between like New York City and Boston on snow amounts that year because of what happened in New England. It seemed like Mike said, almost every single storm. And I think that was the year they had snow in Boston. They had the pile until July.
Yeah.
It finally melted.
I had clients telling me that up in that area that just the snow that was normally pushed off to the side of the road, just like on a normal stretch of road, was as high as his truck was. Not even talking about like in the intersection where the corners get piled up higher and that sort of stuff. We're just talking about the regular piles on the side of the road. So that was a tough one for our clients because it snowed so much that they were running out of places to go with the snow. And that's how that, they started transporting all this snow to different sites. And that's how that giant pile that you talked about not long ago was developed somewhere near Boston.
Yeah, it was pretty gross too, because there was trash in there and stuff. And by the time it finally melted,
it was like shopping carts and who knows,
small villages.
Yeah, some polar bears and penguins walking out of there.
But there's a couple other ways you can get snow too here in the Northeast.
Yeah, there are. I mean, a lot of times we might get a situation,
at least a storm.
Yeah, where we'll have a cold front come through and then it stalls out, south of the area. And that might hang out there, so we're still in the cold air, but you get a ripple of low pressure that develops along that front, rides from southwest to northeast along it and overspreads more moisture. And, you get your your kind of garden variety decent storms of 2 to 4, 3 to 6 type inch.
And a lot of those times,
events.
those are the way that the coastal areas actually get their best snows. Of course they get a nor'easter, but sometimes it changes over though in the really strong storms. But when you get these fronts that are just far enough offshore, maybe like this is more of like for the Jersey Shore and down towards like Eastern Maryland and Long Island, these areas actually do well in these kind of situations when you get that stalled front and a couple of areas, a little pressure up along it.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly can. I mean, they do get the big storms too. I remember the Boxing Day blizzard. Where I'm pretty sure that hit the coast pretty hard. I know Monmouth County seems like the spot in New Jersey, even though it's right near the ocean. They always seem to get it, either whether it's from some ocean effect snow or what it may be. They certainly seem to get it down there. And there's also some stuff, that is very rare that happens. You remember the Norland Trough that seems to get going every now and then?
A couple years ago, Atlantic City, South Jersey.
Yeah, they had a good amount of snow, and it was only in a small swath of southern New Jersey. And that typically happens when you have upper level energy coming across, the northeast.
Kind of convergence zone, yeah.
And then there's a leftover convergence zone or trough hanging back. From a ocean low or something like that that's well out to sea. And it almost kind of feeds moisture into that trough, kind of like a lake effect situation, but it's actually, coming off the ocean. A bit of a different process, of course, but...
So let's talk about what drives these systems now, especially as we get one of those Miller A or Miller B storms. Now, you need the moisture and what we call... a warm and cold conveyor belt. It's almost essential. I mean, it is essential to get big snowstorms. And I'll start with the warm conveyor belt. And basically, it's a area. It's a level of the atmosphere. Basically, it's higher up. It transports warm and very moist air northward from the lower latitude. So think of it this way: there's a lot of moisture and a lot of warm air at a certain level of the atmosphere, above the ground though, obviously, because you have the cold air already in place. But what happens is it rides north and it gains latitude, and then it runs into the cold air, and warm air is actually a lot more buoyant or less dense than cold air. So what happens is that it's forced upward, and then that kind of creates the stratiform precipitation, and that's where you get the snow, because what happens is the lower level is already cold enough for snow. So you get that deep moisture kind of riding into the storm, and it just pushes itself as far up as it can go in the atmosphere until it finally condenses. And then, of course, it comes down as snow. And that's how you get your big snows. And you get those different conveyor belts of moisture. So that's your warm conveyor belt.
This is more like in a mature cyclone.
Right.
Even before that, they have something that we like to call a baroclinic leaf, which is basically the fledgling beginnings of the storm. And that usually develops, based on a temperature gradient that we a lot of times see off the eastern seaboard of the United States. And it uses that gradient to get developed, to strengthen more. And then your conveyor belts start developing, like Brad was talking about, your warm conveyor belt trucking in all that moisture off the ocean, rising over the colder air, and then you have your cold conveyor belt there too. This is kind of responsible for all of that cold air that gets entrained into the system. It makes that nice comma head appearance on the backside.
Mature cyclone.
Yeah, and if you ever look at a satellite image when we're having a big nor'easter or something like that, you'll see that comma head-like display. And that's where some of your heaviest snows are going to fall too, because you're getting your best ratios of snow as it runs into that colder air. Those backsides of those systems can certainly produce.
It's like one big machine. You got the warm air, you got the cold. You need the warm air, you need the cold. You need them both.
Yeah,
and that's the way you get these. And it's the interaction of the two that creates the precipitation and creates the heavy amounts of snow. And like Mike said, you get in that comma head, you can get your 2, 3, 4 inch per hour rates on that northwest side of the system. And, that's where you get your big snows. And like Mike was just saying, the baroclinic zone, think of it this way: a cold chord a cold core storm system as we get in the wintertime, it needs to feed off of something, and it's feeding off of that differential in temperature just off the coast, because you have the cold, it's really cold right along the coastline and on the surface and on the land, and then you actually start to get a little bit warmer and you get into the Gulf Stream. Now granted, it's not 65 70 degrees anymore, but still it's the differential. Now take a warm core system like we get in the wintertime or in the summertime, a hurricane feeds off of the warm water. So same way this one works, a cold core system feeds off the differential in the temperature right there in that baroclinic zone. So the stronger the gradient in temperature, then the better, I guess, snowstorm we can actually get out of it.
Right. And what that storm's going to do, it's going to try to, equalize that cold and warm temperatures around that baroclinic zone. So it's going to try to shove all that warm air up north
as far as it can go,
and all that cold air further south to try to equalize that temperature. And that's what storms are really doing across the planet. They're trying to equalize temperature across the planet. If the planet was all one temperature, you
wouldn't have weather.
Yeah, it'd be tough to get a lot of big systems to develop. That's for sure.
Well, that is even in the hurricane season in the summertime. I mean, that's what these hurricanes are trying to do as well. Like you said, Mike, these are going to eventually move north. They will gain latitude somewhere along the way, unless it gets pinned down in the Gulf or something. But it's trying to push that warm air northward towards the poles and keep everything in check. And then same time, you got polar air coming down south, and you got it all. It's just trying to, like you said, always equalize itself. And the result, though, in between is weather.
Yeah, and sometimes some crazy weather, too. So, man, those are some of the biggest storms I could think of as from the wintertime perspective.
Oh, yeah.
But I think, maybe one more time here, we should talk a little bit about precipitation types. Yeah. Because these big storms in the winter always have some rain-snow line issues, as I'm sure plenty of people along the I-95 corridor know. Here in the Northeast, they're always looking for, where is that rain snow line going to set up? And that's one of the hardest calls in these snowstorms as a meteorologist.
It's amazing too, though, that you got the main thoroughfare, the I-95 corridor, and how many times is that the rain snow line?
So useful.
It's amazing. From Boston to Hartford, all the way down to DC, it's like that is the rain snow line.
Right.
And we just kind of try to see which way it's going to waver with each storm.
Yeah, it's so useful. I think they might have just put that there.
I think so.
They're just like, hey, the rain snow line's always here, guys. So let's just put a big interstate on it. That would be really helpful for these meteorologists.
Yeah.
Maybe they were really thinking of us when they did that.
Now, if that was that easy, though, that's the problem, though, is a lot of times that rain snow line will push back towards Pennsylvania, or maybe it'll go all the way down off the coast. And then, when does that happen? How does that happen? And how much snow falls before this occurs? Or, when this does occur, when does that rain change over to snow? And that's what makes forecasting here in the Northeast such a challenge.
Well, so a lot of times it's when we're looking at these storms developing on the coast, we're talking about coastal storms in the Northeast. There's something called the benchmark point.
Yes.
That we're looking for, that 40-70 benchmark, and that's latitude and latitude, longitude. Yeah. Longitude, I might have goofed up the order of those, but either way,
southeast of New York City.
Yes. And we're looking for these storms to either be at that benchmark, east of that benchmark, west of that benchmark, because that really can tell whether or not you're going to see, snow all the way to the coast, or you're going to get mixing to occur. So if that benchmark, which, like Brad said, is pretty much, south of Long Island a little bit, if you want to try to envision that in your head, if the storm is west of that benchmark, those coastal areas all the way to 95 are probably going to see some mixture happening over the rain.
Yep.
Now, if it's along that benchmark, you're probably going to get snow coming all the way down to the coast, especially if it might be a little bit east of that benchmark, because you're on the colder side of the storm system. You're not getting that warm air all the way entrained into the coast. So that's kind of an important point when we're looking at these coastal storms on the eastern seaboard.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like you said, it's every single year. That's what we fight. It's and granted, that's what our clients want to know, and that's what our job is to do, is let everyone know, this is where the rain and snow line's most likely going to be, and this is how much snow is going to occur before there's a changeover, or vice versa. You know, it could be rain for a good portion of the storm, but as the storm exits, colder air comes in. Maybe we get a quick couple inches on the backside of the storm, and I think that's even worse, because then you're going through a wet ground that's going to turn icy and then accumulating snow. Yeah,
you get your freeze up problems going on there, and you know, you thought you were out of the woods, but then those temperatures crash and you got a big issue.
And you see that a lot up in New England. You see that north wind turn, and that cold air comes straight down into Boston. And I mean, you know, when I used to forecast up that way, I can't tell you how many times, you know, I've had clients call me and say, I'm watching the parking lot freeze before my eyes.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing how that can happen up there, how that cold air from up north, where it's usually all snow up in New Hampshire, just, you know, that wind turns north as that storm's exiting.
Funnels down.
And all that cold air funnels down through Boston, even into parts of Rhode Island and, you know, southern Massachusetts there. It can even freeze up.
It's in that Connecticut River Valley, and we know how hard it is to scour that cold air out of there.
So for everybody out there who does get a bit annoyed, like I used to when I was a kid, when we got mixing happening within the storm, you have all heavy snow happening, you're all happy, right? If you're a snow goose. And then you start hearing those little pings of sleet, you know it's all over. You're going, oh man. So here's what happens, all right? We'll go over this once again.
Oreo?
No, we're not going to talk about an Oreo this time. Right. We'll just go straight through it here, okay? So when it's snowing, and it's all snow, we have temperatures at or below 32 from the cloud all the way down to the ground. When we have sleet happening, we get this little nose of warm air that's above our heads. You know, you won't see it at the surface. You'll still be 25 degrees at the surface, but above, it's just a little above freezing as you go up. So that snowflake hits that warm tongue, it melts to a raindrop, it hits below freezing air once again and freezes that raindrop into a little ball of ice. And that's where you get those, you know, little BBs, almost looks like, of ice just coating everything in the parking lot. Yeah, some people like to call it that too. But yeah, it just coats everything up. Even if your parking lots are salted and wet, this sleet, if it's hard enough, it's going to cover it up, because those little balls of ice do not melt as easy as a snowflake. So, and then once you get more and more warm air aloft, a thicker layer and only a very thin layer of cold air at the surface, now you have a situation where the snow falls from the cloud, it melts to the drop, and then it doesn't have enough time to refreeze into that pellet of ice. So you just have basically rain falling on the ground. And I know we get this a lot of times during the winter. You know, a lot of our clients may call in and they may say, hey, Mike, it's just raining here. Yeah. What's happening? You know, why is it raining? But I'm starting to get some ice. I was like, well, your temperatures, your temperatures are still in the upper 20s. So what is falling is rain, but everything at the surface is below freezing. Your parking lot surface is below freezing. Your sidewalks, your power lines, your trees, your rails, your cars, everything's below freezing. So that rain is just going to freeze on contact as it hits the ground, creating this glaze of ice, which is probably one of the worst things for driving, because it's this clear ice, or some people call it glare ice.
It looks wet, but
it just looks wet, right? But it's just a sheet of ice. And then you know, these are the funny TikTok videos I see where people are coming out of their house and they're slipping on ice and throwing their coffee up in the air trying to get their mail.
There's that
or
one that
like
everyone's probably seen. You know, he comes out to go to his car and he just goes right down into the road.
Yeah, and we shouldn't laugh at that. That's, you know, you don't want our guy to get hurt or anything like that. But you know, there are plenty of videos of people thinking that, hey, there's nothing going on, and then they just start sliding down the driveway. And I mean, so those are the precip types. That's how they happen. You know, that's why it can be still in the 20s and you see rain, but it's causing a lot of issues. And I know our clients out there do not like the freezing rain, because there's not much you can do other than keep salting and salting and salting. So they're running through their product and running through their supplies quickly. And, it's just not super cost effective.
Right. All you can do then is, like you said, salt, and then hope the temperature gets above freezing. In a couple of hours. But yeah, there's times when, you get an extended freezing rain event and, you get, 5, 6, 7 hours of freezing rain.
Right.
Before you know, you got a quarter of an inch of ice on everything, and that's not good. Well, this was great, Mike. I think this was a good apropos topic here in the middle of winter.
Yeah, I hope people really got a lot of information out of this, because this is what, us as meteorologists are dealing with every time we're forecasting a storm. We're looking at the type of storm, the situation. We're looking at those, tracks. We're trying to figure out if the mixing is going to occur. So I really think this is useful, that everybody understands how these storms are developing, where they're coming from, and why things get forecast the way they do.
Yeah, well, we got I think we got a Miller A on the way, so I'm going to go start forecasting, Mike.
Oh, really?
No, I don't know.
You're pretty good at this, Brad. Yeah, I thought you'd say a Miller B, because that's your initials,
oh, yeah, Miller,
right?
I didn't think about that.
B Miller, something like that. But anyway, so that's our podcast for this week. Remember, we'll have a new one every 2 weeks, so come back to the Weather Lounge and see those, or listen to those new episodes. Otherwise, check out WeatherWorks on social media. You can find us everywhere out there.
Don't forget YouTube, too.
Yes, also.
We have our own YouTube channel.
Sure, 100%. And WeatherWorksInc.com, as always. And Mike's giving me the wrap it up sign. So, hey, we'll see you later.